QuitSmokingWeed.com, the podcast on Spotify.
You quit to get clearer, and instead your thinking went slow. Words disappear mid-sentence. You read a paragraph and absorb nothing. You start a task and forget what it was. Underneath it sits a sharper fear. What if the daily use broke something for good? It did not. But that fear is the part worth taking apart. Today, we are looking at why brain fog hits after quitting, what is actually going offline in there, how long it really takes to clear, and why the persistent thought that you damaged your brain is almost always the fog talking, not the truth.
To really dismantle the fear of permanent damage, we have to look at the actual biology of what is happening inside the head. So the active compound in cannabis, THC, acts directly on the endocannabinoid system. We call this the ECS.
Okay, and the ECS is essentially the master regulator of the brain, right?
Yes, it runs memory encoding, focus, and the minute-to-minute signaling between brain cells. Under normal conditions, your body produces its own natural cannabinoids to keep this system running smoothly. But when you introduce daily heavy amounts of external THC, the system becomes flooded.
And the brain is, it is highly efficient. It must do something to manage that constant flood of chemicals.
It adapts. It does this by downregulating its own CB1 receptors. It literally pulls these receptors away from the surface of the cells and shifts its baseline chemistry to cope with the constant presence of THC.
It sounds a lot like a house thermostat that adjusts to extreme summer heat.
How so?
Well, if it is really hot for months, the air conditioning gets used to constantly blowing freezing air. When the weather suddenly drops back to normal, the system keeps blowing freezing air for a bit while it struggles to read the room. The house is not permanently broken. The sensor is just confused and trying to catch up to the new reality.
And that is a highly accurate way to look at it. The underlying mechanism is very similar. When the external substance is removed completely, the nervous system is suddenly running below normal efficiency.
Because the receptors are still hiding.
Yes. It has fewer active receptors available, so it recalibrates to function without the daily chemical input. A biological system actively rebuilding its own signaling architecture is the exact opposite of brain damage. Brain damage implies cell death or severed connections that cannot be repaired.
So it is just a temporary state.
Receptor downregulation is a temporary, reversible protective measure the brain took to survive the daily flood of THC. Now that the flood is stopped, the brain has to push those CB1 receptors back to the surface of the cells. This physical process of rebuilding takes time and energy, which leaves you in a temporary deficit. The cognitive engine is simply starved of its normal signaling capacity while it is under construction.
So the thermostat is catching up. That makes sense on a cellular level. But for the listener sitting at their desk, staring at an email they have read 4 times, we need to pinpoint exactly what is misfiring in that moment, because the drop in cognitive ability feels incredibly sudden.
The specific functions going offline are working memory, processing speed, and verbal recall. Working memory is your ability to hold information in your mind while you actively use it. It is like remembering a phone number just long enough to dial it, or holding the beginning of a sentence in your head so you can form the end of it.
Which explains walking into a room and completely forgetting why you went in there.
Yes, that is a classic working memory failure. Then you have processing speed, which is the raw clock speed of your thoughts. And verbal recall is the mechanism of pulling for a specific word or a name in the middle of a conversation. These 3 functions are the first to drop and the last to come back. Word blanking is a completely expected symptom of receptor recalibration. It is not a red flag of a lasting injury.
Heavy long-term use actually causes its own quiet cognitive dulling that builds over time. It reduces memory encoding and slows down processing speed over months and years. That is a crucial reframe for people who think the brain fog only started the day they quit.
The dulling happens so slowly that the user adapts to a degraded baseline. They stop noticing that they are not functioning at full capacity.
Yeah.
They just assume their current state is their normal state.
Right.
Withdrawal fog feels worse, mostly because it comes on incredibly fast and because the person is finally paying attention. They expect to feel sharp the moment they put the substance down. But instead, they're hit with the reality of an acute withdrawal state on top of an already lowered baseline. A lot of people were already impaired before they quit. They just could not see it through the daily haze.
I have to ask, though, how could someone possibly function for years at work or in a marriage without noticing their own brain was running slow? I remember feeling completely blindsided by the sheer volume of details I missed once my own sudden hyper-awareness kicked in. It seems impossible to hide that kind of impairment from yourself for a decade.
I would say you are underestimating the human brain. It is a master of compensation. If your verbal recall slows down by 2% a month over 5 years, you unconsciously learn to use simpler vocabulary. You rely on lists more often.
Oh, I see.
You lean on rigid routines, where you do not need a sharp working memory to get through the day. You avoid complex, fast-paced debates where you might lose your train of thought. You essentially build external scaffolding to support the internal decline. The insidious, gradual nature of long-term impairment allows you to function adequately on the surface.
And quitting removes the scaffolding.
Acute withdrawal strips away that scaffolding overnight. You are suddenly forced to confront a brain trying to operate without its chemical crutch. The discomfort of that acute reality is what finally makes the impairment visible.
Okay, so the receptor recalibration is the core baseline issue. But the experience is made significantly worse by two compounding factors that arrive at the exact same time. The first is sleep disruption. 5 broken hours of sleep impairs cognitive performance no matter what else a person does. Early withdrawal sleep disruption is often the biggest contributor to the fog.
It is massive. And the second factor is elevated anxiety. An anxious, hyperactivated nervous system consumes cognitive resources constantly. Focus feels hard because the attention system is partially occupied processing an elevated threat signal. Brain fog, bad sleep, and anxiety feed each other. They are not separate problems to be solved individually.
How does the anxiety actually burn the focus, though?
A hyperactivated nervous system is stuck in a low-level fight-or-flight state. When the brain perceives a threat, even a false chemical threat caused by withdrawal, it diverts blood flow and electrical energy away from the prefrontal cortex.
That is the area right behind your forehead.
Yes. It is responsible for your working memory, your logical thinking, and complex problem solving. The energy is redirected toward the amygdala, the fear center of the brain, to scan for danger. This biological redirection burns through your focus. It makes the working memory deficits feel far more severe than they actually are from the receptor downregulation alone. You are trying to do highly complex cognitive tasks while your nervous system is actively preparing to run from a predator.
The biological unfairness of the situation is just staggering. I mean, the brain desperately needs deep restorative sleep to heal its ECS receptors and build back the missing connections. But the sudden lack of THC is the exact thing keeping the nervous system awake and panicked at 3 in the morning. The repair mechanism requires sleep, and the injury actively prevents it.
The initial few weeks involve surviving that exact paradox. But the brain is highly resilient, and it will begin to force sleep as the sheer exhaustion builds.
Yes.
Even if the sleep is fragmented and filled with intense, vivid dreams due to REM rebound, the anxiety is a direct result of the chemical imbalance. It is not a psychological weakness.
Which is helpful to know.
Recognizing that the panic and the sleeplessness are symptoms of the repair process helps lower the secondary stress of worrying about the symptoms themselves. Every single day of fragmented sleep is still a day where the receptors are quietly adjusting in the background.
So the question every listener is asking right now is when this actually ends. You have to be honest about the timeline here. The fog is heaviest in the first week, then it begins to lift. For most daily users, clear improvement shows up around weeks 2 to 3. Genuinely sharp thinking usually returns by weeks 6 to 8, which lines up with what we call the clarity phase.
And for heavy, long-term users smoking several grams daily for years, full recovery can run up to about 3 months. The trajectory still points up the whole way, though.
What causes that difference in the timeline?
There are variables involved that shift it. Younger brains recover faster due to neuroplasticity. High-potency concentrates like dabs or vape pens produce steeper, longer-lasting fog than traditional flower because they flood the system with a much higher volume of cannabinoids. I should also add, if thinking stays badly impaired well past this expected window, you should get evaluated by a medical professional to rule out other underlying issues.
The variability of that timeline is incredibly frustrating, though. Why can the brain not just follow a strict schedule for everyone?
The variation comes down to the individual load of THC stored in the body's fat cells and the specific density of the receptors that need to be rebuilt. THC is highly lipophilic, meaning it binds to fat. As you burn fat, those stored molecules are slowly released back into the bloodstream over weeks.
So it is just a matter of volume.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Someone smoking 90% in THC wax daily for 5 years has forced a much deeper biological adaptation and built up a larger stored reserve than someone smoking 15% flower every evening for a year. The timeline cannot be rushed. The fear of permanent damage is extremely common and understandable because the dysregulation feels profound.
But the biological reality remains a consistent upward trajectory of repair.
Yes, the broken feeling is a reversible adjustment. It's a temporary starvation of neurotransmitters, not a lasting injury.
The physically and emotionally hardest stretch often occurs in the middle weeks. The initial motivation of quitting has faded, the withdrawal symptoms are lingering, but the true clarity has not fully arrived. We cannot force a fixed calendar date for recovery, so we must focus on the actionable levers available today to support the brain's repair process.
Cardio is above everything.
Absolutely above everything.
Even a 20-minute walk drives the brain's own recovery. It increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, supporting neural connectivity, improving sleep, and reducing anxiety.
Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, acts as a biological catalyst for the very receptors you're trying to rebuild. When you elevate your heart rate through cardiovascular exercise, your body naturally synthesizes this protein. BDNF physically helps neurons build new connections and solidifies the signaling pathways that the withdrawal disrupted.
Like fertilizer for the brain.
Yes, exactly like that. The physical exertion also helps clear the cortisol and adrenaline that are fueling the heightened anxiety. We also need to protect sleep. Quality matters heavily since the quantity is likely compromised right now. Using magnesium glycinate at doses of 300 to 400 milligrams in the evening and maintaining consistent wake times can really shift the baseline.
Magnesium glycinate works by gently blocking NMDA receptors in the brain. These are the receptors that process excitatory signals. By blocking them, magnesium calms the overactive signaling of the hyperactivated nervous system. It tells the brain to turn down the volume.
And the glycinate form is important, right?
The glycinate form is highly bioavailable and less likely to cause digestive upset compared to other forms like magnesium citrate. Taking it an hour before bed gives the nervous system a biological cue to down-regulate and prepare for rest, which is exactly what the healing brain struggles to do on its own during early withdrawal.
Now, during the day, you should work in short 25-minute bursts. Do not force focus. Protect against compounding factors by eating 3 meals and maintaining consistent water intake. Dehydration and low blood sugar impair cognition on their own. Finally, do not make big life decisions in week 1. Working memory is genuinely limited.
Providing the body with basic physiological stability through food and hydration prevents the brain from entering a deeper state of stress. The brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's energy. When blood sugar drops, the brain perceives it as a survival threat,
Which spikes anxiety and further degrades working memory.
Yes. Minimizing stress on the brain in week 1 is purely about not compounding already stretched resources. The brain only has so much fuel to allocate. If it is spending most of its energy repairing the ECS and managing withdrawal anxiety, you cannot expect it to perform complex analytical tasks at a high level.
I actually want to point out something specific about those 25-minute bursts. This is not a generic productivity hack to get more emails sent. It is a necessary, rigid boundary to match what the working memory can actually handle right now without triggering an anxiety spiral. Pushing past that limit when the receptors are not there to support the cognitive load just causes sheer frustration.
And that frustration spikes the anxiety, which then burns through whatever focus you had left.
Right.
Keeping the cognitive load manageable means giving yourself permission to perform below your standard capacity for a brief, defined window of your life. The frustration of forgetting a word or losing your train of thought is often worse than the memory lapse itself. Accepting the 25-minute limitation allows you to achieve small tasks without triggering the threat response.
Because the goal of the first month is biological stabilization.
Yes. Every time you force a tired brain to perform complex tasks for hours, you risk elevating the stress hormones that directly oppose the repair of the endocannabinoid system.
The mental static of the first week is real, and it is earned. Your brain adapted to daily THC for months or years, and running that recalibration takes time. The cognitive abilities are not gone, they are just offline while the system adjusts.
The very fog you are cursing right now is the physical sensation of your brain doing the hard work of rewiring itself. The clarity you want is actively being built in the background of that static.
For more on getting through this, head to quit-smoking-weed.com.